Ooh, don't say mean things about Doug. Don't say mean things about Doug.
That's your new mantra in life, Hank. Don't say mean things about Doug. All right. Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. What is it? October 17th. It's a beautiful day in a mindset kind of way, but here where I am, it is cold and it is rainy, and it's a perfect day to be inside working on something that is so important to us, and that is our writing. I'm joined today by Mr. Hank Garner and Mr. Robert Smith, making a welcomed appearance on this show since Abby has taken the day off today, a well-deserved day off. So you're stuck with us three today. How are we doing today, gentlemen?
I'm finer than a frog hair split three ways.
A frog hair split three ways.
That's fine.
I like it. I like it. Robert, what about you?
I'm doing quite well despite my technical difficulties, I guess. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, that's good.
Awesome. Well, the folks in the chat are saying that you need a title, so you can go ahead and do that.
I'm just
want.
some guy.
You're just some guy.
I just show up randomly.
He doesn't even work here.
Yeah, I'm the collective pseudonym of the Dabble team. That's all.
All right, before we get into it, let's hop over to the chat. And I see that NJ's here and TW is here. Hello, and Ella. Hello, Ella, and Bon. Hello, Bon. And let me keep scrolling down here. Bridget is here. And Bridget, I see that you're having some technical issues with an email switch. I've made sure to highlight that with our support team. So hopefully we'll get that resolved sooner over later. Who else do we have with us in the chat? We have Alter with us, and Stephanie. Hello. And we're so chatty today. I love it. And Rachel's here. Hello, Rachel. And I'm almost down to the bottom of the chat. I think Sarah's here. Hello, Sarah, and Manny, and Emily, and Julia, and Beth. Okay, I think I got everyone. Hello, hello, hello. All right, we have an exciting show for you today where we're going to talk about some of the stuff that we learned about if you watch the video that came out on Monday, where we're just talking about characters all week long. They are such an important part of your story. We're going to discuss a little bit about our own writing. We're going to talk about the topics that we covered in that video. But if you want an in-depth look at them, I say go check out that lesson on our channel. Make sure you're subscribed while you're at it and reference the template and the exercises that are going on in there to come up with just awesome characters. And then, of course, we have a ton of time reserved for Q&A because last week we had so many questions we didn't actually have enough time to cover them all. So we made sure we have a good chunk of time for that. But Hank, Robert, one of you, let's start with Hank. Hank, how is your 60-day novel challenge novel coming so far? How's the planning? How are the characters shaping up?
Characters are shaping up phenomenally well. I already had these characters. Let me just say, I cheated a little bit. These characters have been living with me for about 10 years. They're actually characters from a previous novel that I'd written, but I always wanted to tell their kind of origin story. And it's kind of grown more to be more than just an origin story. It's origin story plus side quest, but I already knew these characters. So that this part of the process was very easy for me because they're like old friends have been walking around in my head for 10 years. So, but yeah, but I will say most of the time in the novel creation process, character usually comes first to me. So that's kind of the easy part. The hard part, if you will, is getting into the world building. And I know people like you, Doug, just thrive on the world building. And if you could do that full time, you would. I really appreciate that because that's not my strong suit. That's not my default. So that's something that I have to really kind of work at more, but character comes easier for me. And that's not a brag or a flex, that because world building is hard for me. So, those are just the trade-offs of different people having different ways of approaching story.
Yeah. Awesome. Now, Robert, before I ask you the same question, I want to highlight some stuff going on in the chat here. First off, NJ saying, "Isn't Robert technically their boss?" I mean, yeah, but he's just some guy. He's,
Yeah, I'll just hang around.
It's like when I point out something that my wife and I should do, she looks at me and she says, "But I'm just a girl." And I'm like, "Okay, fine, that's your excuse, Robert. That's your excuse. I'm just a guy. I'm just that
Like
guy."
my role on the team is mostly when there's a problem, they say, Robert, there's a problem, and then I run and fix it for everyone else. So I'm kind of I might be the boss technically, but I kind of just my preferred state is just solving problems for the rest of these guys. So that's why I'm usually in the background anyways, but
If there's a problem, he'll solve it.
I also see that Anne is here. Hello, Anne and Verna and Susan and Shelly. But I also want to point out the question that NJ asked: how many of us are doing origin stories this time around? Because it seems like a few people are, which is very exciting. And NJ said we should do a poll on W, and anyone's welcome to make a post on W too, right? So if you have a great idea for a post, go ahead and throw that up there, because I think that would be a really cool one. But one of the things that we're really going to talk about today is what Sarah pointed out here, that I've been doing the character backstory. I found that doing the character backstories has helped me with the plot as well. And that's the whole point. You'll find as we get into next week and then in week 4, when we tie everything together, that these things aren't like isolated. We're doing them one at a time, but the last step every week is to reflect and combine everything, right? Refine and combine. Which is because when we talk about conflicts next week, you're going to get more character ideas. And when you thought about characters this week, you were adding to the plot ideas that you brainstormed the week before. Then when you start outlining the entire plot, you know what your characters want, you know where they've been, you know where they're going, you know how to push their buttons in the way that's going to be most effective. So it all comes together. There's a method to the madness of this writing thing that we do. And it's so cool when that all clicks. I love it. I love it. What a burger. All right, Robert, how is your planning coming along?
great. Just to clarify, this is a Weezer hat. I'm a 90s kid, so I'm a big fan of Weezer, the band, if you haven't heard of them.
Was it Windows 95 that shipped with a Weezer video? Does anybody remember that besides me?
I don't.
It was like the one that was the takeoff of the Happy Days. Do y'all even remember Happy Days? Never mind. Never mind. I'm sorry I brought it up.
Should I be wearing a hat too, by the way, gentlemen? Like, did I miss a memo?
Well,
Yeah,
Robert showed up with his hat, so I grabbed mine off the shelf just because we wanted to make you feel left out, Doug.
How's my story coming?
Technically, mine says Papa Bear, though.
Just to give some praise to the 60-day challenge and the curriculum surrounding it. I kind of had the bare bones of my story put together, of like I kind of knew what the main conflict would be. I had some of the main characters figured out. And it's not a crazy story. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm just trying to write something that I can actually get 50,000 words written for. But in week 1, I had in week 1, I had a really cool realization that I needed to add another character to kind of the main roster. And the reason that I needed to add him was he would provide kind of a new level of conflict for the other characters of the story. So basically, it's like yeah, he's basically like a sidekick character who hangs out with our main character, but slowly there's a rift grows as they disagree on how to solve their current problems. And that just led to like this really cool like brainstorming session that I had, where I realized like, oh, this is who this character is and why he's making those choices. And then with that, then I went into the backstory portion of this week and was thinking about how do these two characters know each other, and they have a shared traumatic backstory. And that also added new depth and new meaning to the world, and adds to the overarching conflict. And so it's really fun to go through this curriculum and kind of figure it out, and have those aha moments as I'm going along. So yeah, I'm having a great time. I'm really excited.
Fantastic. That's excellent. I for my own story, I love villains, right? And they're so much fun to write for me, and especially in my usual genre of dark fantasy, you can get real creepy with them, you can get real detailed with them, you can show things from their perspective, and it's not always pleasant, it's rarely pleasant actually. But so I spent a lot of this character week looking at the antagonists in my story and giving them their own backstory and figuring out why are they doing this thing that they're doing. Because even though the story is your protagonist's story and it's their journey, every character has a reason for doing things, and very few characters these days are evil just for the sake of being evil. There's something that's pushing them to go the route that they have gone down, and that we learned about the Big Hurt, and we'll talk about that in a little bit in this show. But that often drives villains or antagonists to do what they do, and so I had a lot of fun exploring that. And now I'm wrestling with this idea of how do I adequately show that backstory, or at least the result of it, while sticking with a single narrator first person POV. I'm still not used to that kind of writing. I'm used to being able to tell from my protagonist's perspective, and then the sidekick's perspective, and then the antagonist's perspective whenever I want the most emotional punch. Right? So that's what I'm looking forward to trying to master when we write in November. But yeah.
Along with that, just on that same note, that's what made it so fun is once they had kind of a shared traumatic backstory, they both now believe the same lie. And one of my characters is going to start to reject that lie, and the other one is going to hold tight to it. And that's what leads to some great
Excellent.
conflict, where these, lifetime friends are kind of torn apart by that lie that they both believe and the ways that they handle that. So just
I
so
love
fun.
it. And we see some people relating to all of this in the chat as well, especially Sarah with her antagonist. Bond saying that you're gonna have to rewatch the beginning of this later because you're paying too much attention to the chat. Try being on our side. It can be so distracting. But I love it. I love seeing all the stuff come up in the chat. And before we go on to talk about specific topics from this week, I do encourage people to drop any questions they might have about character development, character relationships, backstory, motivation, goals, anything that was on the docket for this week. If you have a question about it, go ahead, drop it in the chat. We'll answer it at the end of the show.
And because the chat is so lively, if you would please put your questions in all caps, that would just help us. It'll stand out from the pack. So, not that we like being shouted at, but when the chat is as lively as it is today, things can get lost as they scroll past. So, if you'd please put it in all caps, that'll just help us to see it.
As Rachel pointed out here, character building is so hard. And even when you have an idea of who you want your character to be and what they're going to do, it's not as easy as just being like, I want a Robin Hood character who does this. Okay, start writing. Right? If you've never written a story before, then it's gonna be tough. Okay, so let's talk about our first little snippet from the lessons this week. And actually, speaking of Robin Hood, we mentioned tropes and archetypes in the very first part of the template and the lesson. Tropes and archetypes being two different things, but they're similar. They're collections of personality traits or character traits that make them more recognizable to people without us having to put in pages and pages of description. So with archetypes, we have a lot of great articles over on Dabble about different archetypes, but you're looking at things like the creator, who is obsessed with inventing things or making something or leaving a legacy. You have the outlaw, who's your Robin Hood kind of character. But then you also have some tropes that are more genre specific. So they're called in romantasy, shadow daddies are a trope. I know that comes from Hank's favorite stories. But your brooding standoffish male character that ends up being the love interest after a chapter or two, right? And there's enemies to lovers usually goes along with that, which is a different kind of trope, but a trope nonetheless. So, Hank, are you using any tropes or archetypes in your story?
Well, I'm using man, I'm sure I am. I haven't really given it a lot of thought though. It's a traditional mystery, a murder mystery, like an Agatha Christie style. You would say it borders on cozy only because there's there's not just brutal murder in it. There's a dead body that's found, so you don't see the murder. Um, I didn't necessarily lean into the cozy tropes. It just happens. It probably would fit there. I like to think of it more as a traditional mystery, like Agatha Christie type. There's a dead body. There's an amateur sleuth. So those are
Mhm.
classical mystery tropes. Um, there's there are two protagonists. One is kind of the main protagonist, and the other is like a 90% protagonist. You see everything through his point of view, but his girlfriend is very close in the story, and she helps him. So you've got two amateur sleuths. Um, and you've got red herrings, misdirection. Not necessarily a trope, but these are things that you expect to see in this type of story. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of twists and turns, misdirections, people that are accused that look guilty, but then you find out they're not guilty. So yes, but I haven't really thought about it in those terms. But that's I probably should do some trope inventory this weekend.
There you go. That's your homework.
Yeah, right.
Robert, what about you?
Sent in the chat. The question is just what story are we writing?
No, what are you using any tropes or archetypes in for your characters?
Yeah, the orphan archetype is the tragic backstory for both my main character and his best friend. So, um, so that yeah, that's been helpful in informing. And I knew that they were orphans, but then once I fleshed out the backstory, then it kind of helped me get all that other good, delicious detail in there. So
Awesome. I want to point out something that you just mentioned. Like, are they actual orphans? Parents are, no
yeah,
more? Okay.
yes,
So most most orphan archetypes are actual orphans. But just to be clear, the title of an archetype doesn't mean they have to be that thing. An orphan archetype, you don't need to be an orphan. A magician archetype, you don't need to be a magician. These are just the names we've given them. But yeah, my main character she's an actual orphan, but doesn't follow the orphan archetype, which I'm a little back and forth on. We'll see. I want to play with her backstory a little bit more to figure out exactly how much of it I want to pull up. I know what her big hurt is. I know what her lie is that results from it. But one of the characters that I dug more into this week is this secondary character where my main character is a monster hunter, but she's a monster herself. No one knows what kind. And there's a federal ministry devoted to monster hunting as well. And she has to work with a team from this ministry in this book. And so there's a lot of conflict because in the first book, my main character said, if given the chance, they'd throw me on an operating table and see what makes me tick. Kind of thing. So there's a lot of tension there. But what I'm doing is taking the lead of this team and I'm making her into the hero archetype, where she stands for virtues and her sense of morality and what she thinks is right. But what those virtues and that morality is often very different than what our protagonist thinks is right and what she considers moral and virtuous, especially because those virtues would target our main character if given the opportunity. So I had a little bit of that epiphany this past week, and I am really excited to write about that conflict. All right, I see a bunch of questions coming in here, and we'll again have a ton of time for them. But there's a couple more things we want to talk about from this week. Let's move into backstories, and specifically the big hurt and the lie. And just so we're on the same page, again, more info, go and check out the lesson. But the big hurt is also called the ghost or the shard of glass, depending on who you're asking. But it is a traumatic event in your character's backstory that, as a result, creates what we call the lie. Other people call it the wound. The lie is this flawed philosophy that your character believes wholeheartedly to be true, and their mind forces them to believe that to protect them from the big hurt happening again. My go-to is often in romance, you will see someone is left at the altar before the story even starts, or if it's a movie, like the first scene. And from that, they say, love doesn't exist, or love isn't worth it, or I shouldn't waste my time on love, something along those lines. And then the whole story is picking away at that lie, testing it again and again until the character realizes, okay, this isn't the truth. I have to embrace this new truth, and then I'll be happy at the end of the story, right? Or relatively happy, depending on the story. There is more to backstory than that, right? You can have other events in your backstory that create flaws, that create strengths and skills and relationships, and you, in fact, should have those things in there to make a whole character, a very developed character. But the big hurt and the lie that results from it is what's going to inform your internal conflict when we talk about that next week. So, Hank or Robert, whoever wants to go first, either of you guys want to tell us about your character's backstory, maybe what their big hurt might be? Don't all jump at once.
So my main character is an aspiring novelist. He has inherited a little bit of money, just enough to keep him afloat for like 2 years, and he is attempting to break into publishing within that 2 years until he has to go get a real job. So he has this interesting time where he's able to do that. He's struggling though, and he's kind of in the murky middle of his book, and he just can't find his way through. And so he's floundering a little bit. He has a girlfriend who he dearly cherishes and wants to ask her to marry him, but he feels like he needs to accomplish something in life so that he would feel worthy of her. And in his mind, finishing this book and getting that will be the thing that really kind of launches him into adulthood. Like he'll feel like an accomplished adult so that he can, you know, it, earn a wife and build a family. Not saying that these things are true, but in his mind, these are the things that he has built up that will make him worthy. And so that's his kind of big struggle. And then, Stu is his name. Audrey is her name. Audrey doesn't see him that way, but she understands the need that he has to kind of prove himself. So she's giving him the space and the room to do that. And then, in the midst of all that, a dead body shows up. And so, the big lie, the big hurt is that he doesn't feel worthy, and he's trying to accomplish something that will make him worthy. And then, in the midst of that, something drops in his way that turns all that upside down and makes him reevaluate, what his worth is and all of that. So
Excellent. I like that. What I really want to point out there before you tell us about your story, Robert, is that you said that what the character thinks is true isn't necessarily true, right? Like I don't think you need to earn, someone's approval if you love
Right.
them and they love
Right.
you, right? But Stu believes this wholeheartedly to be true.
Yes.
And
yes.
that is there's a question here that I can just pop up. Where did it go? Here, NJ. Is it only your character that's supposed to believe the lie, or is your reader supposed to believe it? And how do you achieve that? You don't need to convince your reader that the lie is true because your reader hasn't gone through the big hurt that your character has gone through. Okay, so it's because of this event or because of stuff that has happened before that your character has this untrue philosophy that they believe to be true. And you don't need to explicitly state it to the reader. Like Stu never has to say, oh, I really need to get this book finished, or Audrey, was it?
Yeah.
Or Audrey will never love me. right? Like going around
Mhm.
kicking his feet on the ground, shaking his head and whatnot. That's not really something that would happen. But what would happen is it manifests as stress, like, oh, I'm not getting this book done. Oh, I'm going to disappoint people. Oh, that deadline is looming and I haven't written in a week. Like those things bring out the lie. We rarely, especially at the beginning of the book, we rarely state the lie explicitly. It will
Mhm.
come out in dialogue, it'll come out in actions, it'll come out in
Yes.
reactions.
Yes. You don't want to have a scene of angst where you're convincing the reader this is the truth. No,
Mhm.
the reader kind of needs to realize it's not the truth, but the reader needs to believe that Stu believes it's the truth.
Mhm.
That it rarely is the truth,
Yeah,
but the reader needs to believe that Stu believes that's the
exactly.
core of it. It's not you don't need to convince the reader, you just need to convince the reader that your protagonist believes that.
Yeah. Because if you're here's something I want everyone to take away about the lie. The character believes it so strongly to be true because if it wasn't true, the alternative is death or something as bad as death.
Yeah.
It is something so traumatic, so painful for them that their subconscious never wants them to ever experience it again. And so the lie might seem ridiculous to you or I, but to them it is true. 100% no way around it. Until they start experiencing things that test it over and over again until you get to the climax of your novel. I'm so impassioned. I love talking about backstory, guys. Robert, please take it away.
Yeah, I mean, my main character and his best friend, the orphan archetype, they lost their parents in a tragic fire, kind of thing. But that's not the only thing that happened with the fire. There was also like this split of society essentially that happened because of it. So with that, that informs their big hurt because they then become wards of the state. Um, but then they truly believe that it's like uh that there are it's like the people at the top, the evil people, they're all evil. None of them can be redeemed. And like they are just kind of chasing their dream of escaping this city that they got left in essentially. Um, but it comes down to that like the upper crust of society is the reason that the fire happened and the reason that we are orphans, so we have to stick together. And it's us or them. Like it's just that very like uh I guess the technical term for that would be like tribalism is the lie that they believe, where it's just like we can't trust anyone else outside of our in group, because none of them look out for us, kind of thing. And so yeah, it's a fun idea to play around with. Um and that was what helped me realize like uh where a lot of these conflict points will happen, because that's just an interesting, they're caught up in a situation where they find themselves the the unknowing kidnappers of like essentially the governor's daughter. They didn't
I
know that
hate when
they
that
were
happens.
kidnapping the governor's daughter. They were just told to take this shipment to another place. um and so as one of them holds on to this lie and thinks that uh she's part of the problem, she can't be trusted, she's never going to help us anyways, like let's just dump her and get rid of her, kind of thing. The other character will think, well, no, like she's a person, and kind of like grows in empathy, and that will lead to really interesting conflict between all three characters as this as it kind of progresses. So
Awesome. It's funny because my character's uh lie is more or less the same, right? You can't trust anyone. We can only do this ourselves. But hers isn't necessarily tribalism because she's intentionally blocking off most people. And hers comes from the fact that she was an orphan, because we can't know where she came from because we don't know what kind of monster she is. But then her adoptive parents also abandoned her when they found out that she is inhuman. And so that is her big hurt. And then it's just reinforced by other things, by people making comments about her being a monster, by her not wanting to get too close to people, by actual monsters showing up around her all her life, and her being in this kind of situation. Which just goes to show in all the examples here that there are multiple things that piece together to form a backstory. The big hurt is unique in that it produces the lie, but those other events that you've come up with and the other people who exist in the backstory all add a brick to the whole house that is your character. All right. So very, very exciting. Love to see it. Love all the chat going on here. People encouraging my passion for backstory. Love it. Saw that Manny just changed the big hurt. Why can't I just commit to one thing? But that's
you,
why
Manny.
we have.
you.
Sorry, go ahead, Hank.
I was just saying, I feel you, Manny. I'm with you.
That's why we have a whole month for planning too, right? When you start with just some high level ideas in week 1, by the time you get to week 4, those ideas have grown and changed and shifted and become better versions of themselves or completely different versions of themselves. So that's just part of the magic. That discovery is so much fun. I love it. Okay. Goals and motivation was the next thing. I only want to spend a few minutes on this and the next topic before we get to the flurry of questions that we have coming in. Hank, we put out a tip from you earlier this week about goals and motivation. Do you want to explain the difference between the two, or do you want me to do it? Because I'm just yapping away anyway.
Go ahead, and I'll
All right.
correct you if I need to jump in.
All right. Well, I'm gonna not necessarily quote, but paraphrase what you said before.
Yeah.
Because I really liked how you differentiated it in that goals are these almost tangible things. They're not necessarily tangible, but they are checklistable, I guess, which is a real word. They're things that can be accomplished. We can say we have reached this goal. And if you've been to any of my workshops, you know I love goal setting, so I'm obsessed with this topic as well. But motivation, on the other hand, is a little less tangible, and it's this ideal that is pushing us to accomplish our goals. And so characters have their own goals, they have their own motivation, they have probably multiple goals depending on what we're talking about. They have a goal that spans the whole story. Their goal might span 2/3 of the story and then change to a different goal for the end of the story. They might have smaller goals along the way, in a scene, across a couple chapters, and then across all of the acts. And then they have motivation that is pushing them to accomplish these goals the whole time.
You can think of it in terms of goals are what you want to accomplish. Motivations are things you're driven to accomplish. It's one is
I like that.
one is a verb almost, and a goal is some sort of a weird noun. It's a thing that you want. It's a thing you can name that you would like to get, but the motivation is the action that pushes you toward that.
Yeah. I want to tackle this question right now from Bridget. So the motivation comes from the lie, but the goals don't necessarily. Motivation doesn't necessarily come from the lie. It can, and there is an innate motivation to the lie of security, to keep themselves safe from this thing happening again. But odds are they have a motivation to do something else at the same time, right? They can have their big hurt that informs their lie, and that is in their head the entire time they go through the story. But also at the same time, an evil wizard is about to invade their town with an army of zombies. Okay, now their motivation is also to protect their family, right? But if you can tie those things together, if you can tie the threat of an invading zombie army to the lie or the truth that opposes the lie together, that's where you get the magic. That's where you get the really cool stuff going on in a story. And we talk so much more about that next week. Like that's what the entire week is about, with a little journey into subplots as well. So yes, the lie produces a motivation, but motivations also exist outside of that big hurt lie dynamic.
Yes.
Yeah. As an example of that, and to answer my portion of it, for my characters, like their goal right now, at the beginning of the story, is to just get their own ship and kind of do their own thing. And that's partially informed by the fact that they like don't trust the out groups, you know? They just like, well, we know we can trust ourselves. And so it's partially informed, but it's not like they're not like we don't trust the out groups, so we're trying to fight them. It's just like they're seeking escape, and that's their goal. And the motivation for that is, just like finding that level of independence away from all of the stress of their past and things like that. So, if that's a good example.
Yeah. Yeah, and to the people asking about if motivation and goals can change, for mine, because my character has more of a flat arc because I'm doing an episodic series, but for her, her goal is to find the killer clown that they're looking for, and her motivation is to get paid, stop people from getting killed, and end this job as quickly as possible once she finds out she's working with the feds. But as the story progresses, we learn that one of the Fed's family is taken hostage, and most of them die. So the motivation switches then. The motivation goes from it's a job to saving people, the family of this person that we've come to know, right? It's
Talk about
kind of
taking your
different
work
goal.
home with
Oh,
you.
yeah.
Mm.
The antagonists call it takeout, actually.
Touche.
But like NJ said here too, another way to view it is a goal is the destination and motivation is the vehicle that gets you there. The important thing to understand, and I think I say this in the lesson, is that when you are presenting, the reason you have to know your character's motivation is because their motivation has to be stronger than the threats that they encounter or the risks that they encounter. Because if they are not, there's no reason that character would push through those threats or those risks or those obstacles. If I don't really like my family that much, I'm not sticking around to fight the zombie army as it comes into town. Okay, I gotta love them in order for me to stick around for that, or have a sense of justice or a sense of community, like I have to defend the whole town or something along those lines. But I have to believe it so strongly that a horde of the undead is worth facing. All right, and then our last topic, relationships, because characters don't exist in isolation in our story, and we don't exist in isolation in the real world. Even the most isolated person is a product of their past relationships and whatever current relationships they might have. So relationships form a two-pronged thing you need to think about: how they occur in the backstory of your character and what current relationships affect them. Backstory relationships are going to be a lot like the other events that you've thought about. How have these relationships formed the character into who they are? You don't need to detail every single human being they've ever encountered, but pick one or two that are the most influential. Just figure out how this has changed the person and if it relates to the big hurt and the lie that they believe now. And then the relationships that they have during the story affect their development and the path they walk down, the things available to them, the things that get in their way as well. Hank, tell us about a relationship in your coming novel. You're muted.
Jeez. The big relationship's kind of front and center, between Stu and Audrey, and that's really, but then you have the other relationship, which is the relationship of them with the town and the townspeople, because it's a small town, like a lot of small towns in the South, kind of built around a town square where you got what kind of all of the busyness of the town kind of happens around a square. That you've got the courthouse and some diners and some shops, and kind of everything happens within view of everybody else. A lot of small southern towns kind of started that way. So you have this, and Audrey runs a used mystery bookshop. And Stu holds court in a corner table of the bookshop, kind of as he's writing, and helps people find stuff to read and stuff like that. So they're both active members of the town. Well, then when Stu, and by association Audrey, starts trying to solve this murder, they kind of make enemies, or at least build distrust with the rest of the town, because they start accusing people, and Stu decides to start a true crime podcast where he's accusing people, with thousands of listeners, and so you've got the relationship with the two of them, and Stu's feelings of inadequacy there, and then teaming up with Audrey, and it's kind of them against the rest of the town, and so you've got kind of a double relationship dynamic there going on.
Awesome. Robert, what about you?
I've had a couple
You've
years
alluded
to
to
think
it,
about
but
this. Yeah.
Yeah, the main relationship that gets explored is between these three characters. So the two best friends and then this new kidnapped daughter that they didn't realize they were kidnapping, as they're trying to not it's a nautical tale, so set in a fantasy world with huge sea monsters and things that they have to avoid, and other good stuff like that. And so it's just, yeah, the relationships are where all of the juicy conflict is going to come from, where uh you know my main character and his best friend are going to be pulled apart, and his best friend is just going to see that as outright betrayal of their relationship and the history that they share, whereas the main character is like slowly uh coming to terms with, like, he's starting to not believe the lie, but he still kind of wants to. And yeah, that's just where all the good conflict is coming from, is these relationships between these characters. So
awesome.
I wonder if my book wouldn't benefit from a sea monster.
I
I
mean,
love a
can
good
you
sea
say any
monster.
book wouldn't? Yeah.
I,
I've ever told you guys I have, is it thalassophobia? The fear of deep water?
I think so.
oh,
Which
You did
I
tell me when I told you I was
okay.
about this book that I was writing.
Okay, that makes sense. I bring it up here specifically not for, a sympathy points, but to point out that my fear of deep water, though I love swimming, is not rooted in a traumatic event. I didn't almost drown when I was a kid. I wasn't, plunged underwater and forced to look at the creepy things down there for minutes at a time. It's just a flaw. It's just a thing that is true about me. So we've talked about the big hurt and the lie a lot, but your character can have other flaws as well. Not everything needs to be rooted in a deeply traumatic event. They can just have something that is not normal about them. Hank's going to
how,
say something.
how deep are we talking, Doug? Swimming
It's
pool
like,
deep, or
no,
are we
swimming
talking
pool I
ocean deep?
love. Swimming pool I
Okay.
love. It's when you get to the point where like if you can't see, it's not even if you can't see the bottom, is the concept of being in something so vast and dark and unknowable that it makes me ill to think about. And I think I said
Mm.
this to Robert before, and I might have said it on stream, but there's the Subnautica games out there that look like I would love them. I will throw up before I play those games. No, thank you. Or stay in the shallows the whole time and experience like 10% of it.
It does capture that fear where
Ugh.
you, in the game, you can stare out into the vast expanse of the sea, and then
No.
you see this like enormous shadow pass off in the distance, and you're like, "Ugh."
Yeah, it'd be the shadow for me. That would do it. Mm.
Anyways, enough
Anyway,
of Doug's trauma.
But yeah,
Let's
enough
stop
trauma
trying to
dumping.
traumatize Doug here.
What I do want
I'm
to
gonna have
point
you
out
lay down on
here,
that couch back there and talk about it.
Ella asked if we've already talked about character arcs because you stepped away for a bit. We don't actually. We briefly talk about character arcs in the exercises this week, and I think it's a condensed character arc statement. But we don't dive into it specifically because a character arc doesn't mean anything until you have the internal conflict to fuel it, as well as the external conflict to push them forward and backwards, which is what we're talking about next week. So you can start thinking about your character's arc right now, and you probably already have by thinking about the lie that they believe and the relationships that they have and where they want to end up. But it's next week when we start thinking about conflict that you're going to start piecing more of these pieces together. Bridget's asking if it's a fear of the depth or what's in the depth. It's I don't distinguish. It's a fear of what might be in the depths.
The unknown.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That is it for our agenda of stuff to cover. And we have 45 minutes left in this. I said we're here till 3:30 my time, Eastern. So we have 45 minutes for questions. So keep them coming in. And Bond's saying, but the week 2 template includes the character arc. Yeah, so you can start thinking about it, and the 9 steps that it does include are if you want to go deeper, but it's really that condensed one that you want to start thinking about, and then you'll flesh it out next week, right? Everything kind of builds on each other and forces you to go back and flesh things out. So if you have a great idea for a character arc now, I'm not going to stop you, but you'll get a lot more out of it next week when you think about the internal conflict.
And if you want to dig deeper into character arcs, we have an amazing characters course and a characters workshop. If you want like a condensed version, you can find the workshop. I'll put the link for the course in the chat right now.
Yep.
But yeah, the course is amazing on crafting compelling characters. Again, the course is laid out to like follow it sequentially, but because the challenge is pretty fast paced, there are different sections of the course that you could just dive into, like specifically, like during the story, internal and external conflict. There's just a whole lesson just on that, and then there's a whole lesson just on positive character arcs. There's another on negative character arcs. So and relationships. So you can go into the course and kind of pick out the ones that apply most or that you're trying to solve right now. We're all kind of like on the clock right now at the 60-day challenge. So if you don't have time to go through the whole course, which I totally understand, then the lessons are also laid out pretty well. So that way you can just kind of hunt down what you need, or you can go through the workshop, which is also in our Dabble courses. And that kind of touches on all the points in a more condensed format. So
Yes, absolutely. And for Bond's question that just came in, I can't find the short story course. We don't actually have a course on short stories. We did a challenge earlier this year, and I just shared the playlist for those videos in the chat. All right. Sarah, don't put nightmare fuel in the chat. Okay, let's take a look at the questions here. And we'll go back to the beginning. We'll pick some of them as we go along. I'm going to prioritize. I think they're all about questions, but we're going to prioritize the ones about questions just for the sake of time. Starting with, let's go. Berlin asking, what if I have a villain, but for most of the book, he isn't really mentioned at all? Well, then have I already asked this? I don't think you have. But I always have thoughts. I always say I have thoughts, but who wants to go first? I always have thoughts. So let's, Robert, you go.
I would say I'm a fantasy and sci-fi writer, so my thoughts might differ from yours, Berlin, for whatever genre you may be writing in. But I have a similar deal where I have a villain in my story who doesn't get introduced until later in the story. But that doesn't mean you cannot see the effects of their scheming. And I think that that's a good, satisfying way to do this is just make sure, like, tie some threads around not all of the problems that your characters face, but a good chunk of them, and make sure once the villain is introduced that the dominoes kind of fall eventually for the characters and they realize that so many of their problems were caused by the villain. And then your villain feels evil because of all these terrible things, especially if they like had a big loss along the way and they realize that that loss was caused by the villain. Like if you want to sell your villain as evil, then you don't need them to just be like cackling in the background and visible the whole time. You just need the effects of their actions to become visible at some point.
In the same, or I'm sorry, were you finished, Robert?
That's all.
I was just going to tag on what you said. In the same way that the Deus Ex Machina is used as a solution to the problem, or the God in the machine, where just all of a sudden the Eagles show up and carry everyone, to safety. Sorry, that was a touchy subject for some
Jab.
people. Yeah.
I can defend the Eagles for the next 30 minutes if you'd like me to, Hank. Just to be
Look,
clear.
I was just being spicy just to be spicy. I doesn't. I'm just punchy today. It's Friday. But in the same way, you don't want your villain to just magically show up at the end and all of a sudden that have been the answer to all of the evil that's gone on in your. You need to. And I think Bond had a great comment here that Voldemort doesn't show up, but he's there. Like the effects of Voldemort are there. The how he has tainted a certain portion of the population that are kind of bleeding into the story, and you hear rumblings of him, but he doesn't actually show up. Like in the same way, you need to be kind of telegraphing your villain even if he's not a character on the stage. So you just don't want to just drop him in the third act and that's why everything's happened. You need to, and maybe this is a second draft thing. When you read through, you look for places to add some context to it early on. And if it's a reveal later in the book, what you always want to do with reveals is have the reader say, "Oh my goodness, I should have seen that all along, but I didn't." And so you don't want to telegraph it in a way that they see the clues, but in hindsight, they should see the clues and think, "Oh my gosh, why couldn't I see that?" So think of in those terms.
I want to highlight Bridget's question here, and we got a couple questions like this before too, which is very similar to what Berlin asked as well. But I need help with my antagonist. I don't know how much my reader really needs to know about her, or how much time I need to give her in the actual story. Yep. Well, that's fun. But what I wanted to add is add in the villain or the antagonist where it makes the most impact or where it adds the most to your story. So if you're writing in in the fantasy genre, it might be like in my stories, I love getting some villain POV in there to show what they're doing, to show their agency, to show part of their journey as well, and how it's ruining the lives for my protagonist. But in a lot of stuff, like I'm listening to the Dresden Files right now, because they're all from Harry's point of view. You don't see the villain, you see the impact of the villain until like the ghost shows up or the werewolf shows up or whatever shows up, right? But you see what they're doing. So even if you don't show the villain on screen per se, you're showing their impacts the entire time, because the villain is there to go head to head, even if not literally, but through their actions, to stop the protagonist from achieving their goal. And so their presence should be felt, even if, to what we were saying already, even if the reader doesn't know that, even if it doesn't become apparent until later in the story, their effect has to be there, or they have to be there in some way. But you get to choose which is the most impactful. All right, Robert, do you want to pick a question?
Sure. Sorry, I was just trying to star them and then I accidentally clicked one because a new
Yes.
message came in. Okay, we'll just go through these.
Okay.
NJ West, how do you add motivation to a character, or how do you create a motivation for them?
It's a big question.
It's a big question.
You have any ideas, either of you?
I think the big thing for me when thinking about motivation is making sure that it's tied to emotion. Because if it's just like, oh, uh, I just want to be better at fishing, like that's like, okay, that's a cool motivation. But when we're
Yeah.
talking about stories, like I like Hank's character's motivation of he wants to feel like he's made it in some way. He wants to feel like he deserves to
Mhm.
he's reached adulthood and that he wants to prove himself. And that's like a very raw emotion of wanting to belong.
Mhm.
And I think that if you tap into those raw emotions, if it can still be like, I want to become a better fisherman. But if that is tied to a raw emotion, like because I lost my dad and we used to go fishing all the time, and that's what made him happy. And I want to understand what made him happy about this. So I'm gonna get better at it. That's suddenly a way more compelling motivation. So I think it needs to be rooted in those raw emotions that the reader can relate to.
Yeah. I think that's super important because the goal that the motivation is fueling can be something that the reader will not relate to. To go back to my zombie example, no one here knows what it's like to face down a horde of the undead. Fortunately, I would say, but we all know what it feels like to love someone or be loved. And so when your motivation to defend the village is your loved ones, we relate to that, right? If there wasn't that motivation, how are we supposed to really root for the character beyond, oh, kill the scary zombies? Right?
Yeah.
Think anything to add?
I don't have anything to add to that. I think you perfectly summed it up, Robert. That it needs to, your motivation needs to be tied to some deep want, or some reason to feel something. It can't just be, I want to be better at fishing. That was a great analogy.
All right.
Awesome.
Do you have
I
any
just want to
question?
highlight Bon's message here. Sorry, Bon. We should have known that you've faced a horde of zombies before.
Right.
Eh,
Okay. Next
or from
Look,
question.
Sarah.
I have
Uh,
7 grandkids at my house today in the living room. I can tell you all about hordes of zombies.
uh, sorry. Next
Okay.
question.
Okay. Next question. Also from NJ West. Can a secondary character turn into a main character? Yes. Next question. No, just kidding. When would you guys for you guys, when do you change a secondary character into a main character? Has it happened before?
In between stories.
Okay.
Because, and so give me a second here. I just want to pull up. Yeah. So in step 1 of this week's homework in the template, we have main characters, and then the only options under main characters are protagonists, which is like main character, primary character, protagonist. These all mean the same thing. So I think a lot of people consider main character to be an important character who sometimes gets their own screen time. That's not the case, right? And if you want to go by that nomenclature, sure, whatever. But the protagonist is whose story it is. And when we talk about conflict next week, it is their internal conflict and their external conflict throughout the whole thing. Everything else that happens is in support or opposition to those things until we reach the climax and they're resolved together. So the reason why I, snippily say in between books is because it doesn't make sense for a secondary character to be introduced and us go on this journey of a character story only for that to completely change in the second act or the third act when this supporting character becomes the protagonist. It's very disorienting, and it takes away some of the impact of the stuff that we've been through with the protagonist, right?
And I will
Can,
say
can I?
that
No, go ahead, Robert.
that might change. I know that NJ is writing pretty in-depth sci-fi. So NJ, you might have multiple POV characters.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think that Doug's point stands on um, in the story that you're telling, who are the characters who are closest to that central conflict? Those are your most likely your main characters. And uh, I love Brandon Sanderson and The Expanse and all these stories that jump from lots of different
Mm-hmm.
POVs. But through those characters, like there's usually you have your core cast who are going through what the story is about. And so I think it's useful to think of main characters as who is this story about? And that might happen when you have a large cast in these grander tales. It might happen that one of your side characters gets a little more screen time and you realize, oh, this person's a little more important to this main conflict than I thought, and that might transform them into a main character as you realize like, oh, they're actually really important to what's going on. But I think Doug's point is your main characters are those that are most tangled up in the main conflict of your story. And the conflict, you can have subplots, but your main plot you do want to keep uh pretty clear for the reader. You don't want that to be too muddied up and like uh what are we actually trying to what are the problems we're actually trying to solve in this story as the characters in this story. So you were going to say, Hank?
I, you just cleared up that. I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay.
I do want to highlight NJ's follow-up question here. If you're writing from the perspective of the antagonist, are they your protagonist then? No,
Ooh.
they're your perspective character. They are the narrator, potentially, if it's like first person, or they influence the narrative prose. But they are still the antagonist, because there is still the arc of your story, and that story starts with where the protagonist is. It goes through their journey, and then it hits them resolving it. Okay, there are unreliable narrators,
I was about to
right?
say it, but even with the unreliable narrator, who's the protagonist of the book? And
Exactly.
it's narrated unreliably from an antagonist point of view, and half of the book you don't know that. But even because it's narrated by her, she's not the point of the book.
Wow.
Like that, like this is a great example of what you're saying. That
And there are villain protagonists as well. There are stories about bad people doing bad things, and sometimes getting better, sometimes getting worse, and they might be working against the best interests of a hero. And we normally think protagonist equals hero of the story. No, protagonist equals who the story is about. And so if it's about a villain fighting against a hero for bad things, they are the protagonist. But if you have a protagonist and you have a scene from your antagonist's perspective, the antagonist doesn't become the protagonist. They believe they're the hero, and so the way they view the world and how they speak and how your prose is written might reflect that, or probably should reflect that, but they are not the protagonist for your story.
NJ said, "Spoilers, Hank. Sorry if the plot of Gone Girl, and that was the book, Bree. If the plot of Gone Girl is lost on you at this point, I'm sorry, but yeah."
You had that like ready to go too.
Well, it just happens. I was just doing some work on my shelves earlier this morning and just remembered that Gone Girl was sitting right there. So it's not
We bring
always
it
that I
up a
can just
lot
reach
too.
and pull one. Yeah. So,
All
Okay,
right.
let's keep going down the list. How do you keep the side characters that are needed to interact with the main characters from numbering into a few hundred?
good luck.
Yeah. You just write 1,000 pages.
I would say, just to jump in here, that figure out what the core of your story is, and because you can have a story that has lots of tangential cool stories, but figure out what the core of your story is, and see if your story can stand with trimming out those stories. And then once you've trimmed those out and figure out what your core main story is, then see if you can add some of those back. And if you can add them and take them away and it doesn't matter to your story at all, maybe consider leaving them out.
Robert, any ideas?
Yeah, I think it's also about like uh I think it's pretty easy with secondary and tertiary characters to just combine them sometimes. Like if you have a merchant that sells one item and a merchant that sells some other item, just have them have a bigger shop that can sell, multiple things. Or like just think about your day-to-day life and how many people you interact with versus how many people you like are actually engaging with, like even in our modern day with cell phones and constant connection, like how many people are you actually engaging with on a day-to-day basis? It's pretty small. And so um unless I guess if you're just a crazy extrovert, then maybe you're talking to thousands or a few hundred people in a
Or you
week.
work customer
But
service.
But yeah, I would say that's also something that I've seen work specifically with The Expanse. The Expanse has a lot of characters in the books, and the TV show is also amazing. If you haven't seen it, and if you like sci-fi, then I highly recommend it. But they combined some characters for the more condensed format of television, and I think they did it well. And that's just a way that I think you can cut down that number, so that way the readers aren't just buried in fantasy names with far too many apostrophes and hyphens in there.
To tie this to the question we just had too about protagonists, when you identify your protagonist, you can identify what the other characters do. And we call secondary characters supporting characters because they're all there to support the story in some way, whether for or against the protagonist. So once you can identify that, and as Hank says, what the core is, find out what your characters need to do for you and need to do for your character, especially your protagonist, then you can start whittling them down. Then you can start combining them. You can have like especially if you're writing in like fantasy or sci-fi, you can have a larger cast, and the characters that exist in that cast, like in my dark fantasy series, like my main group of heroes, I have 2, 4, 6 and a voice in the main character's head. But 2 of those 6, like they're there and they get highlighted sometimes, but they aren't usually the primary ones in the discussion. They aren't the ones that we focus on. It's never from their perspective when I switch narrators between scenes. Like they get developed over time, but they get developed through the actions of other characters as well. Right? And for a 50,000 word book, you can't have too many characters because you just don't have that much space.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, next question. This is one I'm excited about. Do you think it works to have 2 big hurts? I've been staring at it, so I can start because I've
Okay.
got some thoughts.
Okay.
I think that I think you can make that work, but in terms of our technical definition of the big hurt, it might just count as one anyways. So let me explain. If something really terrible happens, I'm just my 2 characters are orphans, so I'm just gonna run with an orphan big hurt. But if my main character's dad dies in a fire and mom dies drowning, like 2 years later, I would argue that that's the same big hurt, even though it's 2 different events. And I would argue that if you have some kind of big hurt, but they're unrelated, I would say maybe that's dangerous territory. I would say if you think about what Doug was saying earlier, where like we're all just products of the events and relationships in our lives. I think that you can certainly have multiple traumatic events in your character's past. It doesn't have to be like, and then that one really bad thing happened to me, and that informed the entire rest of my life. But it could be, that there is a series of unfortunate events that yeah, there's a series of unfortunate events that kind of your character's big lie then would be that they're just cursed. They might think that they'll never be happy because so many bad things keep happening to them. So then you get that big hurt informed by multiple traumatic events. But let me know if that isn't answering the question. But I feel like you can have lots of traumatic events, but still have the one big hurt.
Yeah, Hank, do you mind if I go?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. From a let's go clinical definition perspective, you can't have 2 big hurts, but you can have what Robert was explaining there, and you can have, I'm going to pop Bond's comment up here, a big-ish hurt, a slow hurt, and an unnoticed hurt. We can put the question back up. Sorry, I meant the actual question. I don't know where it is, but can you find it again for me, please, my friend?
I will find it. I will find it.
Oh, here we go. I got it. Nope, that's the wrong one. You find it. Okay, so I talked about this over in the community, and I can't remember who asked it, but there is only one event that will be the big hurt, because the big hurt by definition is the event that creates the lie. And so, to what Robert said, you can have trauma and negative events leading up to this that make the big hurt as painful as it is, because maybe in isolation it wouldn't have been so bad, it wouldn't have been so traumatic, it wouldn't have created the lie. And you can have trauma and negative events after that that reinforce it. And so everything before the big hurt might cause the big hurt to be so painful, but it is that specific event that creates the lie, informed by the rest of their life and then reinforced by everything that comes after. But you don't really have two big hurts, because the big hurt creates the lie. And so if the first one didn't create the lie, it's not the big hurt. And if the first one did create the big lie, then the second one isn't the big hurt, it's just a reinforcing event. So if that's the case, if you think you have multiple big hurts like this, or ghosts, or whatever you want to call them, then it might be you want to combine those events into something more traumatic, or revisit which one it. And when I say traumatic, for the record, it doesn't have to be bloody, it doesn't have to be near-death experience. It is that character's perception of something that is very painful and that they don't want to experience again. So like if you're writing a children's book, okay, children's books don't actually usually have a big hurt and a lie, because kids can't wrap their heads around that. But if you're writing for like a younger audience, then the trauma that a younger audience can relate to is different than what the trauma that most adults can relate to, right? So trauma, the big hurt part of it, varies, but it's one event that creates the lie, and everything else dog piles onto it or created the foundation for it.
You and
Oh,
I were
and
talking about this right before we went live, Doug, that when you're talking about the big hurt, if you have too much trauma, that becomes the character's normal life.
Mhm.
So it, by definition, can no longer be the big hurt, because they just live in hurt. So you have to find a way to up the ante from what might be horrible, but because you've made that their baseline normal, you've got to really, determine some catalyst that kicks off the story. So be careful when you're thinking about trauma and the big hurt, because it needs to be something that separates from the normal. So think of in terms like think in terms of that.
Yes. So this point, exactly. Bond having the aha moment here. Mine is decades long disappearance of self, kind of slow hurt that culminates in a cheating spouse. Decades long disappearance of self, slow hurt, and then one event that's defining.
Right. Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing
And
example.
Of something else that Bond said here. You don't have to say the big hurt out loud, right? Because my biggest hurt is recent, but it solidifies the slow hurt. And that's for most stories, you don't usually say it out loud, or when you reference it, because it is an important event to the character. So it won't be uncommon for them to mention it to a close friend or relative, or bring it up, not casually, but like as part of their existence, the way that we all do. But they generally are not aware enough of their own lie that they say, the me being cheated on now makes me think that all love is worthless, or what have you, right? They aren't going to make that connection. They might not know how important or defining that event was, but they can still reference it sometimes. So for an example, last year when we did the 60-day novel challenge, my protagonist's big hurt was her going to this fight that ended up getting her best friend killed, and it was a fight that she didn't need to go to, and so the death was needless, and that haunts her. That informs her lie that she is not good enough to be making these like battlefield decisions. She doesn't have the confidence in it anymore, and so another character who's kind of mean to her kept making comments about this mistake that she made, about how she got this other character killed. And so then this new character asked her about it, and she explained the event and why she misses this character so much, but never does she say, I no longer feel confident because of this choice that I made in the past, because she doesn't really make that connection, but we do. Oh, I got all
Related
riled
to
up
that.
again. I love backstory.
He's all riled up. He's all riled up. Related to that, TW asks, can another character discuss the main character's big hurt? I think, yeah, absolutely. And you can have this be interesting character moments where, again, I'm just sticking with the orphan example, but it can just be something soft. Or maybe let's take Bond's example, where maybe Bond's best friend or Bond's character. I'm just gonna play around with your character for 1 second, Bond, if you'll allow me to. But let's say that this character has a best friend from 10 years ago, and all that that best friend says is like, you don't seem like yourself. Something like that can really like hit your character right where it hurts. And if your character reacts in a negative way to that kind of, when somebody calls out that big hurt, then it can be it makes it very clear to the reader that this is a very touchy subject for your character, and can just lead to all kinds of juicy conflict and other things. So I would say maybe not like, maybe not directly, like just think about how people might, with my orphan example, like, it's with my characters, they probably you probably don't walk up to an orphan and just be like, "Hey, I know your parents are dead. Are you okay right now with what's currently happening?" Like that. Like usually, it's a softer approach, or it's a character that doesn't even know that their parents are dead, and then mentions like, "Oh, your parents should have raised you better." Like things like that are still mentions of the big hurt, that they might not even know what they're doing, kind of thing.
Robert's really into orphans today, and
I
I
am.
feel like we need to say Robert does have a loving family.
I
Just
do, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
My parents are both alive and lovely people. If you get the chance to meet them, my mom will be anybody's best friend. So,
I have to give
okay,
a shout out to Berlin's Hamilton reference in the chat. So that's just, it's been like a year since I watched the play, so maybe I should do it again.
never seen
Sorry.
Hamilton.
It's so good. Okay, we're getting
I've
distracted.
heard
We have
that.
13 minutes left and so many questions still.
okay. I wanted to hit on this one since it's related to the big hurt, but it's the big lie. Alternate reality says, I'm struggling with the big lie. Does it have to relate to the plot, or can it be the character's perception of themselves?
Man.
Mm,
Can I dive
prerogative.
in here?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm
Okay.
stewing on that.
Okay, you're going to learn a lot more about this next week when we talk about conflict. So when it comes to the plot of your story, we generally think of the plot as the external conflict. It's the thing that is getting in the way of your character achieving their goal. It is the goal that they want to achieve, and the path that they take to get there. But there's also tied into that the internal conflict of your character. And if you've been to a handful of my Dabble Academy workshops or watched the courses, you'll have heard me say before that the climax of a story is where both the internal and external conflicts are resolved at the same time, because you cannot resolve the plot. You cannot come to the climactic moment of the plot and be successful if the protagonist has not at the same time resolve their internal conflict. Classic example would be like they're on their back about to be killed by the villain when they realize they need to like ask for help, and so they shout to their sidekick, okay, do it now, right? Because they were a lone wolf this whole time. That sort of thing. Those things need to happen at the same time in the climax for the character to be successful and the story to start entering the resolution. So when it comes to the lie, it is an intrinsic part of the plot, but it is not an explicit part of the plot because it is tied to their internal conflict. And if you want to write the best story, you then craft an external conflict that presents obstacles that continually pick at that lie that the character has over and over again, so that they finally build some confidence. So if it is a lone wolf character and they start thinking, okay, maybe I will trust someone for once in my life, then you hit them with an obstacle that's a betrayal, and so they retreat back into the lie. And then they have another obstacle where they need help, and so they take a little bit of a step forward to the truth. And it's that back and forth throughout the whole story until they reach that moment where they have to accept the truth or they die, literally or figuratively, that's when you come to the climax. So it is not part of the plot explicitly, but it is tied to the plot for your protagonist specifically, because it has to do with their internal journey, is the driving force of their internal conflict. It's my favorite topic, you guys.
Doug is
I made
giddy
this
right
challenge
now.
just for this.
I don't want to dull your shine.
No, if you have
Okay.
something to add, go.
No. Why would
I
I?
think
Why,
that was great.
why would I at this point?
Yeah. I will just say, if you're trying to figure this out, a lot of what Doug is talking about is also in our course on different character arcs. Because
Yeah.
how does the big lie relate to the story? That's the character arc portion of the story. And so if you want a positive, negative, or flat arc, all of that you can find in our course on Dabble. We had a couple of questions about goals and motivation, but I feel like we tackled some of those earlier. Let's do this one from TW. Is there such a thing as too many relationship dynamics? Can it get too complicated with families, friendships, relationships?
I would say, can you get too many? I mean, I guess technically, yes. I I think it goes back to, and this is really on my mind because the cohorts that we're running right now. This was an exercise that I did with my group last week of really paring down your story to get down to the central story that's running from the beginning to the end, and the relationship dynamics, do they add to that main catalyst of the story? It strip away what you can, see if your story still lives, and then add them back in. I'm a big fan of getting down to the bare essentials of your story and then adding back for flavor and just removing all the stuff that gets you bogged down. So that's what I would say. Does it serve the story? Does it take too much momentum of the story away? And if it does, see if you can trim that out, and then or add it back in a way that adds to the forward momentum of the story, even if that's get you into one of those try-fail cycles. It may lead to that, but that still is ultimately leading you to the end. That sounds really convoluted when I think about it.
No, I think
You
it
got
makes
it.
sense.
Yeah, okay.
I think, yeah, it just you can distill this down to, does it serve the story? If it doesn't,
Yeah.
then it's probably not worth exploring. You can certainly include it. You can include that they have, a mother-in-law that they don't like, but if the mother-in-law that they don't like doesn't have a place in the story, and they're just there to maybe pick at the character's lie or other things like that, then that's okay, but just don't spend too much time unless it's serving the story.
Yeah.
So
Here's a thought. If you make a story that people fall in love with, and you have things like this that you've cut out, maybe that's a new story in the same world that that can then spawn side quests that then are more works that you publish in the same world, and that's one way to look at that.
The only thing I want to add is that I'm a big fan of the term, serves the story, right? But I don't want people to get this idea in their head, like this negative conception in their head, that means that everything has to like explicitly drive the plot forward with every single line of text that you write. More so with world building, I find that people ask this questions where, like, if you're building an element of your world, it should serve your story. That's one of our golden rules in W Academy. But that doesn't mean that you can't make a small comment with like one line of text that's saying, the details of the cathedral are from the whatever period, right? That adds some enhancement. Mentioning that you don't like your mother-in-law, that adds a little bit more to the character, where you don't need to elaborate on that. If you go on for like a paragraph about how much they dislike their mother-in-law, and then you mention it again the next chapter, then you need to start thinking about, okay, why am I doing this? How does this affect the plot? How does this affect character development? But yeah, I just don't want people, because I feel like I mention, it has to serve the plot so often, and my biggest concern is people misunderstand what that means.
Yeah. I think there we could, if we're going to just get silly with the terms here, we could draw a line between serving the plot and serving the story. Because I'm a fantasy reader, so I love it when there's some little world building details that make me feel like not the entire world that has been built does not revolve around my character, but that
Mhm.
my character is trying to solve a problem in this wider world. And sometimes that means that you include world building details or character details, character relationships of people making decisions that have nothing to do with the main character at all, other than the fact that they have some kind of relationship with that person. And that makes it feel more real and lived in because, yeah, we are all of the main characters of our own story, but there are decisions being made that affect us outside of our life and our control all the time, and I think that that helps make it feel, if the mother-in-law forced everyone to go on a group family vacation and like if that is the reason that the mother-in-law gets brought up, then that's more interesting. And the family vacation might not even come up in the story, but it can just like highlight like, "Oh, I don't want to go because so and so is going to be there," and different things like that. So
um I also want to point out that, so I'm listening to the Dresden Files right now, and there's like the Council of Wizards who dictate what wizards can do. I think it's called the White Council, and the main character mentions them repeatedly, so we know it's an element of world building. We know it exists, but well, in the first book they're more important, but in the second and third book when they're mentioned, it's not like the council is there, or it's not like he has to go and see them, but they have rules, and so he often thinks to himself, okay, I'm breaking this rule, but I have to, right? And so that's one line thrown in there that references world building but also dictates or helps to direct his action. And so that's how you can have these really cool details, and I think especially for speculative fiction, very important to have those details that make it feel more alive. But if you can also tie in some of those details to impact the character, then they become even juicier. Right. But they don't all need to be. But most of them need to.
we've got time for a few more questions here. Another one from NJ. Do all your characters need an internal conflict? I think I'm gonna tweak this question a little bit for you, NJ, because I think you're asking about uh main characters or characters related to the main point of the plot. I don't think you're asking if tertiary characters need an internal conflict. So, do all your main characters need an internal conflict?
No. Okay, your protagonist does, for sure. Because that is the story. That is intrinsic to the story. It's very important. Your important supporting characters, like the sidekick, the best friend, like if they're there 90% of the time, they can have an internal conflict. But if they don't have an internal conflict, then I would say they need a major flaw. Because having an internal conflict, unless it's an ongoing series, kind of denotes that it gets resolved one way or another and that there's an arc associated with it. You could have a really important flawed character whose flaw never changes, and it just impacts how they navigate through the story, how the protagonist is affected, etc., etc. If you have the real estate in terms of word count to give them an internal story and to give them internal conflict, and give them a subplot that allows you to explore it while still going down the main plot of your story, then you can write a really compelling book. And we see that a lot in genres like sci-fi and fantasy. But I don't think that the only one that needs it is the protagonist.
Yeah, and if you have a character that doesn't have a flaw, if they're a Mary Sue character, that becomes their flaw.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
Can we tackle NJ just asked a question here?
Go for it.
How do you organically clarify that your character is of a certain race if you need to? When it comes to any detail that is not superfluous, and by superfluous detail, I'd say something like eye color, unless it's irrelevant to your plot, hair color, height, that kind of thing. If any other detail has an impact on the character and the way that they live their life, the way that they navigate their world. So if your character's family, if the family is black, then there are experiences that go along with being a black family wherever you're living. It's not just a coat of paint that you slap onto a character. It's intrinsic to who they are, and so it requires a deeper understanding. Not knowing anything about you, NJ, about your lived experiences and whatnot. But it could also be as simple as if the character is the white child, just saying, saying something about being raised by a black family or something along those lines, right? But to really treat it organically, you have to understand that there's more to it than it just being a detail like eye color.
This question from Ella. If you're going the negative arc route, does the internal conflict need to be resolved? I would say, especially if you go through the course, then this will be laid out for you. But a negative arc is a resolution of internal conflict. It's just the resolution is that they choose to continue to believe the lie
Yeah.
rather than accepting the truth. So they go down the path of darkness. That is a resolution. It's just a sad or an angering one for your reader,
Yeah.
but can still be very satisfying. So it's not necessarily that a negative arc is not resolved. It should feel whole and complete, and that character has made that decision. It shouldn't like you can. There's obviously redemption arcs, especially if this happens at the end of one story and then the character you want to have redemption in the next one, then there can still be conflict there, but there should be a decision point where they decide, no, I believe the lie fully, and now I'm fully committed to this path of uh not necessarily evil, but just this path of what the reader might perceive as the wrong choice. But for them, it should feel like the naturally right choice. Because nobody steps outside and just decides like, today I just feel like being evil. Like make sure that the decisions they make are making sense. I love a mustache twirling villain. You can also just have those also who just love evil for evil's sake. But it sounds like what you're asking here is more about, how do you sell the internal conflict of a negative arc to the reader?
I would say unless you're writing navel gazing literary fiction, every conflict needs a resolution, and that may be a bit of a hot take, but I think if you're going to start something, you have to see it through for the readers. Unless you're writing in a genre that people don't expect to be entertained, then go ahead.
I dropped a link in the chat there to an article that Abby with an I wrote about negative arcs, and we elaborate a lot more on it in the character development course that we have over at Dabble. But that will get you started. Especially, there are 3 different types of negative arcs that treat the lie and their corresponding truth differently. And it's kind of like a choose your own adventure on how miserable or powerful your character ends up as a result. So it's a good read. Abby, I always say, is the best writer that we have here. So always enjoyable to read her articles.
She's incredible. If you haven't read any of her articles, you should just go read that one right now.
Yeah, for sure.
And we're not just saying that because Abby might be in the chat. Okay, do we want to do one more?
Let's do it.
Sure. Berlin just dropped a question. What is that? What if my character has a conflict that sort of goes two ways. My character has magic unlike his family, so he wishes he was the same as others, but he wishes others accept him the way he was. Interesting.
Which is the more powerful draw?
Yeah.
Does he want to be like them, or does he want to be accepted? I think you can explore both of those, but one of them feels like it needs to be the driving force. One might even be a a diversion almost, that he acts like these are two things he wants, but he really wants this, and he's kind of projecting with the other, or and that becomes a whole other line of conflict to explore.
Yeah, and if we break this up into its constituent parts, you have the hurt underlying all of this of not feeling like he belongs or she belongs. Oh, for this character. Um, and so if he doesn't feel like he belongs, then it's just a question of that's his motivation. What is his goal? Is his goal because he can certainly have multiple goals with different groups of people where he wants to be, maybe he wants to be more like his family in some ways, but also just wants to be accepted by them. Um, but I think Hank nailed it with like, make sure that one of those goals is clear and that your character is working towards that. So
I like that people are pointing out that there's no such thing as a dumb question. So I'm glad we clarified that. To add on to all of this and to dissect it the way Robert did, it sounds like I want to be the same as others is the lie that this character believes. And so the actual conflict is him coming to understand that he is, and not knowing your story, just knowing this sentence that you gave us here. His conflict could be him learning to love himself and embrace who he really is. And at the end, realize, okay, others should accept me for the way I am. And then maybe along the way, find those who do accept him for who he is. And that sounds like a whole story just in a sentence right there.
mhm.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Hank. Thank you, Robert, for joining me on stage. And thank you for all the fantastic chats and discussions and questions that we got. If you haven't already, please go and do those exercises, or the homework, as I like to call it, in your 60-day novel challenge template. And if you are looking for any feedback, or you just want to keep yourself accountable, we do have the space over at dabbleu.com in the challenge community to share your work as well. Show off what you've been doing. Let us see some of those characters and their big hurts and their lies, and what you're setting them up for. On Monday, we will release the week 3 lesson that is all about internal and external conflicts, as if I haven't said that enough already, but also about subplots. And that goes along with the week 3 folder in the 60-day novel challenge template as well. Hank, Robert, anything you want to say before we sign off here?
This was
Happy
awesome.
writing,
I
everybody.
hope you all are having as much fun with your characters as I have been. Just
Yeah.
dreaming up new ways to torture them emotionally. It's just so fun for me. So
That's our job.
And thank you to everybody who comes in the chat and gives us these great questions, which a lot of times makes us think on the spot, and helps us just as much as you. So thank you all for showing up and making what we do awesome.
And make sure to hit that thumbs up button. Give us a like if you enjoyed this show. Make sure you're subscribed. Consider turning on that notification so that you know when that lesson goes up, when our daily tips are going up as well. And if for some reason you're not using Dabble, you can get an extended trial for it for the entire challenge, so you can learn to love it and then just become a dabbler for life, like so many people did last year during the 60-day novel challenge. But with that said, thanks everybody for showing up. We will see you on Tuesday is our next live event at
Tuesday.
Writing Sprints, but Monday's when our lesson drops. So we'll see you there. Bye everyone.
See you guys.
see you guys.